Chief Ikoha pushed through the crowd, desperate to find out if his worst fears were true. He approached the airline's information desk and asked about the flight his wife had been on. The staff, though overwhelmed with the situation, tried to assist him as best as they could. They confirmed the tragic news. Madame Sapporo had been on the plane that crashed. In the bustling city of Port Harcourt, there lived a man who was admired by many. His name was Ikoha. He was not only wealthy but also hardworking. For many years, Ikoha had dedicated himself to building a business that everyone in the city respected. People often spoke of how tireless he was, working day and night to ensure his business thrived. But Ikoha was not just about making money. He was a kind and generous man. Ikoha believed that true wealth was not just about having money, but about helping others. So whenever someone in his community had a genuine need, Ikoha was always there to lend a helping hand. He gave freely, not because he wanted something in return, but because he truly cared for people. This made him very popular in the city. Many people who needed help or advice knew they could always count on him. They respected him so much that they began to call him Chief Ikoha. The title Chief was a sign of honor and respect, and Ikoha carried it with great humility. Despite all his wealth and the admiration of many, Ikoha remained down to earth. He never let his success change who he was. He treated everyone with kindness, whether they were rich or poor. This made people love him even more. He was a man who could sit with a king and dine with a farmer, and he would treat them both with the same respect. Ikoha was married to a wonderful woman named Sapporo. Sapporo was not only beautiful, but also wise and supportive. She had been by Ikoha's side from the very beginning, even before he became wealthy. They had known each other since their younger days in their small community. Back then, life was not easy, but Ikoha and Sapporo had something special. This resilience, a strong will to keep going despite difficulties, connected them deeply. Sapporo was a key part of Ikoha's success. She supported him in every way she could, often offering advice and helping to manage their home while Ikoha focused on his business. She understood his dreams and worked hard to make sure those dreams became a reality. Together, they were a strong team, and their love for each other grew stronger each day. After many years of hard work and dedication, Ikoha and Sapporo were blessed with a daughter. They named her Wendy. Wendy was a beautiful baby, and both Ikoha and Sapporo were overjoyed to have her in their lives. They looked forward to raising her and giving her the best life possible. However, after the birth of Wendy, something unexpected happened. Sapporo faced some complications that made it difficult for her to have another baby. This news was a bit sad for the family, as they had hoped to have more children. But Ikoha and Sapporo, being the strong people they were, accepted the situation with grace. They were grateful for the gift of Wendy and decided to focus all their love and attention on her. Wendy grew up surrounded by love. Her parents made sure she had everything she needed. They taught her the values they held dear, like kindness, hard work, and generosity. Even though she was only a child, Wendy never felt lonely because her parents were always there for her. Ikoha and Sapporo continued to live their lives in Port Harcourt, helping those around them and raising their daughter with love and care. The people of the city continued to respect and admire them for their humility and generosity. As Wendy grew older, her parents Ikoha and Sapporo noticed how intelligent and focused she was. From a young age, Wendy showed a strong interest in learning. She was always eager to attend school and do her best in every subject. Her teachers often praised her for her dedication and hard work. Ikoha and Soporo were very proud of their daughter and wanted to give her the best education possible. Wendy attended the best primary school in Port Harcourt, where she excelled in her studies. She was always at the top of her class and she enjoyed learning new things every day. Her teachers often told her parents how brilliant and hardworking she was. Wendy didn't just study hard. She loved to read books and explore different topics. She was curious about the world around her and always asked questions, trying to understand more. When it was time for her to move on to secondary school, Ikoha and Soporo made sure she went to the best one in town. Just like in primary school, Wendy did exceptionally well in her studies. She continued to be a top student, and everyone at the school admired her for her dedication. Her parents were thrilled to see their daughter growing into a smart and responsible young lady. As Wendy approached the end of her secondary education, she prepared for her external exams. These exams were very important because they would determine her future. Wendy was focused and determined to do well. She spent long hours studying, revising her notes, and preparing for each subject. She knew that doing well in these exams would open many doors for her, and she was ready to give it her best efforts. When the exam results were finally released, Wendy was overjoyed. She had passed all her papers with flying colors. Her parents were over the moon with happiness. Ikoha and Soporo couldn't have been prouder of their daughter. They knew how much effort she had put into her studies, and seeing her succeed made them incredibly happy. To celebrate her success and encourage her to continue working hard, Ikoha made a promise to Wendy. He told her that she could study abroad for her university education. Wendy had also dreamed of studying medicine, and she knew that going abroad would give her the best education as possible. When she heard her father's promise, Wendy was filled with excitement and joy. She couldn't wait to start this new chapter of her life. Wendy believed that studying medicine in a country like England would give her the best opportunity to become a great doctor. She was eager to learn and wanted to be the best in her field. The idea of studying abroad made her even more motivated. She started imagining all the new things she could learn and the experiences she would have in a new country. However, not everyone in the family was so excited as Wendy and her father Soporo. Wendy's mother had a different opinion about her daughter studying far away from home. Soporo loved Wendy deeply, and the thought of her only child being so far away made her anxious. She couldn't bear the idea of not seeing her daughter every day, of not being there to support her through the challenges of university life. Soporo was worried that if Wendy went to study abroad, the distance would create a gap between them. One evening, after Ikoha had shared his plan with Wendy, Soporo sat down with her husband to discuss her concerns. She gently told him that she didn't think it was a good idea for Wendy to go far away. Sopolo explained that Wendy was their only child and that it wasn't wise to send her so far away from home. She worried about what could happen if Wendy needed help and they weren't there to give it to her. But Ikoha listened carefully to his wife's concern. He understood that Soporo was worried because she loved Wendy so much. However, he also knew that this was an opportunity they couldn't let pass by. He wanted the best for their daughter, and he believed that studying abroad would give her the best education possible. He gently explained to Soporo, his wife, that if they truly love Wendy, they needed to support her dreams, even if it meant letting her go far away. He reminded her that they had worked hard to give Wendy a bright future, and this was a step towards that future. Wendy, who had been listening quietly, joined in the conversation. She told her mother how much she wanted to study medicine and how important it was to her. Wendy reassured her mother that she would always stay in touch and that they could talk every day. She promised that no matter where she was, she would always be her mother's little girl. Soporo looked at her daughter and saw how much this opportunity meant to her. Even though it was hard, she realized that she had to support Wendy's dream. She wanted the best for her daughter. And she knew that if Wendy was happy, then she would be happy too. So after much thought, Sapporo reluctantly agreed to let Wendy go. Deep down, she still didn't want her daughter to be so far away, but she understood that sometimes love means letting go. With his wife's approval, Ikoha began the process of securing Wendy's admission to a prestigious university in London. Thanks to his influence and connections, everything went smoothly and quickly. Wendy was soon accepted into a top medical program, and the family began preparing for her journey. The day that Wendy had been eagerly waiting for finally arrived. It was time for her to leave for London to begin her studies. The night before, Wendy could hardly sleep. She was filled with excitement and a bit of nervousness about the new adventure that awaited her. Her bags were all packed, and she had said her goodbyes to friends and family. But as the morning came, the reality of leaving her home and her parents started to sink in. Madame Softborough, Wendy's mother, had spent the night feeling very emotional. She had tried her best to be strong, but it was hard. Wendy was her only child, and the thought of her going so far away was so difficult for her to accept. She had hugged Wendy tightly the night before, whispering words of love and encouragement, but tears filled her eyes as she thought about the morning that was to come. When morning arrived, Wendy got ready for the trip. She dressed in comfortable clothes and made sure she had everything she needed for the long journey ahead. Chief Iko and her father was ready as well. He had promised to drive Wendy to the airport himself. He knew how important this day was for his daughter, and he wanted to be there to support her every step of the way. As they prepared to leave, Wendy went to say goodbye to her mother. Madame Sapporo was standing at the doorway, trying to hold back her tears. Wendy could see how difficult this was for her mother, and it made her heart ache. She walked up to her mother and wrapped her arms around her in a warm, comforting hug. Sapporo hugged her daughter back, holding on tightly, as if she didn't want to let go. "I love you, Mom," Wendy whispered softly. "I love you too, my dear," Madame Sapporo replied, her voice shaking with emotion. She managed to smile through her tears and kissed Wendy on the forehead. "Be safe and study hard. Remember, we are always here for you." Wendy nodded, fighting back her own tears. She didn't want to cry because she knew this was a happy moment, a moment of new beginnings. She promised herself that she would stay strong for her mother. Chief Ikoha, standing nearby, watched the tender moment between his wife and daughter. He understood how difficult this was for Sapporo, his wife, but he also knew that this was a necessary step for Wendy's future. He gently placed a hand on his wife's shoulder and gave her a reassuring smile. "It's time to go," he said softly. Madame Sapporo nodded, unable to speak, and watched as her husband and daughter walked out of the house. As they left, she felt a deep sense of sadness, but also a sense of pride. Her daughter was going to do great things, and she knew it. Chief Ikoha and Wendy drove to the airport in silence for a while. Both of them were lost in their thoughts. Wendy was thinking about the new life she was about to start, while her father was thinking about the daughter he was about to say goodbye to. As they neared the airport, Chief Ikoha broke the silence. "Wendy," he began, his voice calm and steady. "I want you to remember something very important. No matter where you go, no matter what you achieve, never forget where you come from. Our family, our community, and our values, they are what make you who you are. Stay true to yourself and always carry our name with pride." Wendy turned to her father and smiled. "I won't forget, Dad," she promised. "I will always remember where I come from. I will do my best to make you and Mom proud." Chief Ikoha nodded, satisfied with her response. He knew his daughter had a good head on her shoulders, and he trusted her to make the right decision. They arrived at the airport, and after checking in, it was time for Wendy to board her flight. When her flight was called, Wendy took a deep breath. The moment had come. She turned to her father and hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Dad, for everything," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I will make you proud." "I know you will," Chief Ikoha replied, his voice thick with emotion. For the first time, he felt a pang of sadness as he realized how much he would miss his daughter, but he quickly composed himself and gave her a reassuring smile. "Take care, Wendy. We'll be waiting for you to come back with great stories and achievements." Wendy smiled and with one last wave walked towards the boarding gate. Chief Ikoha watched as his daughter disappeared from view. A mixture of pride and sadness filled his heart. He had always been a strong man, but in that moment, he felt a little piece of his heart go with Wendy. After the plane took off, Chief Ikoha made his way back home. The drive felt longer this time, as he was lost in thought, thinking about how much things would change now that Wendy was gone. When he finally arrived home, he was surprised to find the gate to his house unattended. The gate was usually opened by their gatekeeper, Akachi, but today the gate was closed and no one was there to open it. Chief Ikoha honked the car horn loudly, expecting Akachi to come running, but there was no response. He honked again, this time even louder, and waited. After what felt like a long time, Madame Soporo finally came out to open the gate. Chief Ikoha drove in, parking the car, and as he got out, he asked his wife where Akachi was. Madame Soporo explained that Akachi had come to her earlier in the morning, saying that he had an emergency in his village. He had asked her for permission to leave and promised to return the next day. Chief Ikoha nodded, understanding that emergencies happened. "No problem," he said, trying to sound as calm as possible. But deep down, he couldn't shake off the feeling that everything was changing so quickly. First, Wendy, and now Akachi. It felt like pieces of their life were slowly shifting, and he wasn't sure how to feel about it. As he walked into the house, he saw the sadness in his wife's eyes and knew that they would have to be strong for each other in the days to come. The house felt emptier without Wendy, but they would have to get used to it. After all, this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Akachi had been working as Chief Ikoha's gatekeeper for many years. From the day he started, he had always done his job with dedication and a strong sense of responsibility. It wasn't long before Chief Ikoha and Madame Soporo noticed how hard Akachi worked. They could always count on him to be at his post, greeting visitors politely and ensuring that the gate was well secured at all times. Akachi was in his early 30s, and though his job as a gatekeeper might not have been what he dreamed of as a child, he approached it with a positive attitude. He was well-spoken, presentable, and always carried himself with dignity. Life hadn't been easy for Akachi, and circumstances had led him to take up this job, but he never complained. Instead, he focused on doing his best, knowing that his efforts were appreciated by his employers. Chief Ikoha and Madame Soporo were so impressed with Akachi's dedication that they began to treat him as more than just an employee. Over time, Akachi became like part of their family. Chief Ikoha often invited him to share meals with them, and when Wendy was younger, she would sometimes chat with him as she came and went. The family knew they could trust Akachi, and they appreciated the loyalty he had shown them over the years. But Akachi's life was not without its challenges. Despite his hard work, he often struggled to make ends meet. He had a fiancée named Mabel, who he loved dearly. They had been together for a long time, and their bond was strong. Mabel was a graduate of Port Harcourt University and was currently working as a clerk at a company in the city. She was a bright and ambitious young woman, always hoping for better opportunities to come her way. Akachi and Mabel had a close relationship, and Akachi often spoke to her about his job and the kindness of Chief Ikoha. He told her how Chief Ikoha was always generous and treated him with respect, which made his job easier to bear. Mabel was happy to hear this because she knew how important it was for Akachi to feel valued in his work. She admired his hard work and the way he handled his responsibilities, and it made her love him even more. But Mabel had her own challenges to face. Her mother had fallen seriously ill after the death of her father. Mabel's father had been the breadwinner of the family, and when he passed away, it was a heavy blow to everyone, especially her mother. The loss was so great that Mabel's mother developed a heart condition soon after. She had been battling this illness ever since, and it took a toll on their family, both emotionally and financially. Mabel was now the one responsible for taking care of her mother. She did everything she could to provide for her, but it wasn't easy. The medical bills were high, and Mabel's salary as a clerk was barely enough to cover the expenses. She often worried about how she would manage to keep up with everything, and sometimes the stress was overwhelming. Despite the difficulties, Mabel found comfort in Akachi's support. Though Akachi didn't have much, he always tried to help Mabel in any way he could. He would save up little by little and give Mabel money to help her with her mother's medication. It wasn't a lot, but it made a difference, and Mabel was grateful for his kindness. She knew that Akachi was doing his best, and it meant the world to her. However, deep down, Mabel had her doubts and worries. She loved Akachi deeply and admired his character, but she couldn't ignore the fact that they were both struggling financially. With her mother's condition worsening, Mabel often found herself wondering if their love would be enough to get them through these tough times. She needed more financial support to ensure her mother received the care she needed, and she wasn't sure how long they could continue like this. Mabel's heart was heavy with concern, but she didn't want to burden Akachi with her worries. She knew he was doing everything he could, and she didn't want him to feel like he wasn't enough. So she kept her doubt to herself, hoping that somehow things would get better. Meanwhile, Akachi was also thinking about their future. He knew that life was hard for both of them, but he believed that if they stuck together, they could overcome any obstacle. He had dreams of building a better life for himself and Mabel, and he was determined to make those dreams a reality. He just wasn't sure how long it would take or what sacrifices they would have to make along the way. Akachi often prayed for a breakthrough, something that would allow him to provide more for Mabel and her mother. He knew that Chief Ikoha had already done a lot for him, but he hoped that one day he might be able to earn enough to take some of the burden off Mabel's shoulders. He didn't want her to have to worry about her mother's care or their future together. But for now, they both had to be patient and keep pushing forward, even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. They leaned on each other for strength, knowing that their love was the one thing they could always count on, no matter what challenges life threw their way. 6 months had passed since Wendy left for London to study, and life in Ikoha's household had changed. The house was quieter, and though Ikoha and Madame Soporo were proud of their daughter, they both missed her terribly. Chief Ikoha kept himself busy with his business, but for Madame Soporo, the absence of her daughter was hard for her to bear. Every day, she thought about Wendy and longed to hear her voice, to see her face, and to give her a hug. Madame Soporo spent many days thinking about Wendy's time in London. She wondered how her daughter was adjusting to life so far from home, if she was eating well, and if she was managing her studies. Though Wendy often called to share her experiences and assure her mother that she was doing well, it wasn't the same as having her close by. One day, as Madame Soporo sat in the living room looking at old photos of Wendy, she felt an overwhelming urge to see her daughter in person. She thought about it for a while and then decided to share her feelings with her husband. That evening, when Chief Ikoha returned from work, Madame Soporo told him, "I miss Wendy so much. I think I should visit her in London." Chief Ikoha looked at his wife and saw the deep longing in her eyes. He understood how much she missed their daughter, and he thought that visiting Wendy was a wonderful idea. That sounds like a great plan, he said, smiling at her. I will help you with all the arrangements. Madame Soporo's face lit up with joy as her husband was. The thought of seeing Wendy again filled her with happiness and excitement. She couldn't wait to hold her daughter in her arms and spend some quality time with her. Chief Ikoha wasted no time in making the necessary arrangements. He processed Madame Soporo's travel documents, making sure everything was in order. He also made sure to buy some gifts that Madame Soporo could take along for Wendy, things that would remind her of home and make her feel even more loved. When everything was ready, Madame Soporo called Wendy to share the good news. Guess what, my dear? She said over the phone, I'm coming to visit you in London. Wendy was overjoyed when she heard the news. Really, Mom? I can't believe it, she exclaimed. I've missed you so much. I can't wait to see you. Madame Soporo's heart swelled with happiness at her daughter's response. They talked for a while, making plans for the visit and discussing all the things they would do together. Wendy promised to show her mother around the city and introduce her to some of the friends she had made at school. The days leading up to the trip were filled with excitement and anticipation. Madame Soporo carefully packed her bags, making sure to include all the gifts for Wendy. She double-checked her travel documents and made sure everything was in order. Chief Ikoha helped her with the final preparation, ensuring that everything was perfect for her journey. Finally, the day of the trip arrived. Chief Ikoha drove his wife to the airport himself. On the way, they talked about how proud they were of Wendy and how much they looked forward to a bright future. When they arrived at the airport, Chief Ikoha handed his wife the gifts he had bought for Wendy. Give this to our daughter, he said with a smile. Tell her that we are always thinking of her. Madame Soporo smiled and nodded, feeling a mix of emotions, excitement to see Wendy and sadness at leaving her husband behind, even if it was just a short while. She hugged Chief Ikoha tightly before she went to board the plane. Take care of yourself and don't work too hard, she said gently. I will, Chief Ikoha promised. You enjoy your time with Wendy and bring back a lot of stories to share. Madame Soporo waved goodbye as she made her way to the boarding gate. Chief Ikoha watched her go, feeling a sense of pride and love for his wife. He knew how much this trip meant to her, and he was happy that she would get to see their daughter again. After Madame Soporo boarded the plane, Chief Ikoha drove back home. The house felt even quieter without his wife, and though he was used to being alone while she was away, this time it felt different. He missed his family deeply, but he knew that they were both safe and happy, which brought him some comfort. He decided to focus on his work to keep himself busy, hoping that this time would pass quickly until his wife returned. But as the hours went by, something terrible happened. Midway through the flight, there was a problem with the plane. No one on board had expected it, and before they knew what was happening, the plane began to lose control. The pilots tried their best to manage the situation, but it was too late. The plane crashed, leaving no time for the passengers to react. Back in Port Harcourt, Chief Ikoha was going about his day when he received a call that would change his life forever. The news was everywhere. There had been a plane crash. As soon as Chief Ikoha heard this, his heart sank. A feeling of dread washed over him as he realized that it was the same airline his wife had taken. He could hardly believe what he was hearing, and his hand shook as he reached for his phone. Without wasting a moment, Chief Ikoha rushed to the airport, his mind racing with fear and disbelief. When he arrived, the scene was chaotic. There were people everywhere, all trying to get information about their loved ones. Chief Ikoha pushed through the crowd, desperate to find out if his worst fears were true. He approached the airline's information desk and asked about the flight his wife had been on. The staff, though overwhelmed with the situation, tried to assist him as best as they could. They confirmed the tragic news. Madame Soporo had been on the plane that crashed. Chief Ikoha felt the world around him crumble. He couldn't believe it. It was as if everything he knew, everything he loved, was being taken from him in an instant. The pain was unbearable, and tears streamed down his face as the reality of the situation hit him. He cried uncontrollably, unable to hold back the grief that overwhelmed him. The sorrow was too much to bear, and as he continued to weep, he felt his strength leave him. Everything went black as he passed out, his heart broken by the devastating news. When Chief Ikoha woke up, he found himself lying on a bed in the airport clinic. The room was small and quiet, with the smell of antiseptic in the air. For a moment, he was disoriented, not sure where he was or how he had gotten there. Then, the memories came rushing back. The plane crash, the news that his wife had been on board, and the overwhelming grief that had caused him to collapse. As he slowly sat up, a nurse came over to check on him. Her face was kind but filled with concern. "How are you feeling, sir?" she asked gently. Chief Ikoha nodded weakly. His head dropped and his heart felt heavy with sorrow. "What happened after I passed out?" he asked in a low voice. The nurse sighed softly. "The bodies of the passengers have been moved to the morgue here at the airport," she explained. "Families have been coming to identify and collect their loved ones." The words hit Chief Ikoha like a punch to the chest. He knew what he had to do, but the thought of it filled him with dread. He would have to summon all his strength to retrieve his wife's body and bring her home one last time. Taking a deep breath, Chief Ikoha pushed himself to his feet. His legs felt shaky, but he steadied himself, knowing that he had to be strong now. The nurse offered to help him, but he shook his head. "Thank you, but I need to do this on my own," he said. With slow, heavy steps, Chief Ikoha made his way to the airport morgue. The hallways felt long and cold, and each step seemed to take an eternity. When he arrived, he was met by a somber-looking attendant who led him to the room where the bodies were being kept. The sight of the rows of covered bodies was almost too much for Chief Ikoha to bear. His heart ached as he searched for his wife's name. When he found it, he felt a wave of despair wash over him, but he forced himself to stay strong. He had to do this for her. The attendant pulled back the sheet covering her body, and Chief Ikoha's breath caught in his throat. There laid his beloved wife, Madame Sapporo, peaceful and still, as if she were simply sleeping. He could hardly believe that she was truly gone. Tears welled up in his eyes as he gently touched her cold hand. A final farewell to the woman who had been his partner, his love, and the mother of their child. With great care, Chief Ikoha made the necessary arrangements to have her body moved from the airport morgue to another, where he could prepare for her burial. The process felt surreal, like a terrible dream he couldn't wake from, but he knew it was something he had to do. As he drove home with his mind heavy with sorrow, his phone rang. It was Wendy calling from London. Chief Ikoha's heart sank as he realized he would have to talk to his daughter, who had no idea what had happened. He hesitated before answering, knowing how difficult this conversation would be. Finally, he picked up the call. "Hello, Daddy." Wendy's cheerful voice came through the line. "I've been trying to call Mom, but her phone isn't connecting. She isn't yet here. Is she not coming today again?" The question came so quickly, and each one felt like a dagger to Chief Ikoha's heart. He tried to speak, but his throat tightened, and the words wouldn't come out. The pain of losing his wife was still too fresh, too overwhelming. "Daddy, are you there? Is everything okay?" Wendy asked, her tone shifting to concern when she noticed the silence. Chief Ikoha couldn't hold back any longer. The tears he had been holding started to flow, and a sob escaped his lips. Wendy could hear her father crying, and it shocked her. In all her life, she had never heard her father cry. Daddy, what is wrong? Why are you crying? She asked, her voice trembling with fear. But Chief Ikoha couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. He was too heartbroken to explain what had happened. Instead, he ended the call, unable to continue the conversation. Wendy was left in London, holding the phone in disbelief. She had never heard her father sound so broken, and the fact that he had hung up on her without explaining only made her worry more. She tried calling him back several times, but each time the call went unanswered. Wendy's worry turned into fear as she realized something was very wrong. She prayed that her family was safe, but deep down, a sense of dread began to grow. Back in Port Harcourt, Chief Ikoha drove home in silence. The usually lively city seemed dull and lifeless to him now. His thoughts were consumed with grief and the weight of the tragic news he had to eventually share with his daughter. When he arrived at his house, Akachi the gatekeeper was there as usual. Akachi had been doing his job as diligently as ever, but he had begun to feel uneasy. Chief Ikoha had been gone for longer than expected, and something about the situation felt off. Akachi was used to his boss being punctual and organized, so the delay was unusual. He wondered if something had happened. As Chief Ikoha's car pulled up to the gate, Akachi hurried to open it. He greeted Chief Ikoha as usual, but to his surprise, there was no response. Akachi watched as Chief Ikoha drove in and noticed that his eyes were red and swollen, as if he had been crying. This was not the man Akachi knew. Chief Ikoha was always composed and strong. Seeing him like this was deeply unsettling. "Good evening, sir," Akachi said again, trying to catch his attention. But Chief Ikoha didn't even seem to hear him. He simply parked the car, got out, and walked straight into the house without saying a word. Akachi stood there, puzzled and concerned. What could have happened to make his boss so upset? He couldn't stop thinking about the red eyes and the silence, and he began to worry even more. Perhaps Chief Ikoha was just missing his wife, who had only just left for London. But something told Akachi that there was more to it than that. As Chief Ikoha entered his house, the weight of the day's event pressed down on him even harder. The house felt emptier than ever before, and the memories of his wife filled every corner. Without saying a word to anyone, he went straight to his bedroom and closed the door. He couldn't face anyone right now, not his staff, not his friends, and certainly not his daughter. The pain was too raw, too overwhelming. Chief Ikoha sat on the edge of his bed, burying his face in his hands as the tears came out once more. The reality of losing his wife was sinking in, and he didn't know how he would go out without her. His heart ached for Wendy, who was far away and unaware of the tragedy that had struck their family. He knew he would have to tell her soon, but for now, he couldn't bring himself to do that. All he could do was mourn the loss of the woman who had been his partner and his strength for so many years. Akachi, meanwhile, was left outside, filled with worry and confusion. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, but he didn't know what it was. He decided to stay alert, ready to offer any help if needed. But deep down, he felt that whatever had happened was beyond his control. For 2 long days, Chief Ikoha stayed locked in his room, consumed by a deep and overwhelming sorrow. He couldn't eat, he couldn't breathe, and he didn't have the strength to face the outside world. The weight of his grief was too heavy to bear, and he couldn't hardly bring himself to move from his bed. His phone kept buzzing with calls, Wendy trying desperately to reach him, and some of his business associates too, but nothing in the world seemed to matter to Chief Ikoha right now. His heart was broken, and he felt as if he had lost all sense of purpose. Outside, Akachi was growing more and more concerned. The chief's behavior was so unusual, and it was clear that something was very wrong, Akachi had been working for Chief Ikoha for many years, and he had never seen him like this. The house was quiet and no signs of life from inside. Akachi kept checking on his boss, hoping for some kind of response, but there was nothing. He even tried calling out to him through the window, but still there was no reply. On the third day, Akachi decided that he couldn't wait any longer. He knew something had to be done. He walked up to the door of Chief Ikoha's room and began to knock. At first, there was no response, but Akachi was determined. He kept knocking louder and louder until finally he heard the faint sound of movement from inside. After what felt like an eternity, the door slowly creaked open and there stood Chief Ikoha. When Akachi saw his boss, his heart sank. Chief Ikoha looked like a shadow of his former self. His eyes were red and puffy from crying. His clothes were wrinkled and his face was pale. The strong, confident man that Akachi knew was gone, replaced by someone who seemed utterly broken. Without saying a word, Chief Ikoha stepped aside and allowed Akachi to enter. The two men stood there in silence for a moment, both unsure of what to say. Then, as if a dam had burst, Chief Ikoha broke down in tears. He fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably, and all Akachi could do was kneel beside him and try to offer comfort. "It's going to be okay, sir," Akachi said softly, though he didn't know what had happened. "Everything will be fine. We'll get through this together." But Chief Ikoha shook his head, his body trembling with grief. Through his tears, he finally managed to speak, his voice choked with emotion. "She's gone. Akachi, my wife Soporo, she's gone." Akachi's eyes widened in shock. For a moment, he couldn't believe what he had just heard. He felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him, and for several seconds, he was lost in his own thoughts. Then, without warning, a scream of anguish escaped from his lips, echoing through the empty house. The pain of losing Madame Soporo, the woman who had always been kind and welcoming to him, hit him like a wave, and tears began to stream down his face. The two men cried together, their sobs filling the room. There was no one else there to comfort them, so they held onto each other, trying to find some solace in their shared grief. It was a moment of raw, unfiltered emotion, and for a long time, they simply wept, letting their tears flow freely. Eventually, the tears began to slow, and they found themselves sitting on the floor, exhausted from the weight of their sorrow. The house was quiet again, and now it felt as if the walls were mourning the loss of Madame Sopero. Everything seemed to be in mourning, the people, the house, and even the very air itself. Later that evening, Chief Ikoha knew that he couldn't avoid speaking to Wendy any longer. He had to tell her the truth, no matter how painful it was. He reached for his phone with trembling hands and dialed her number. It didn't take long for Wendy to answer, and as soon as she did, Chief Ikoha could hear the worry in her voice. "Daddy, where have you been? I've been calling and calling. Why haven't you answered? Is everything okay? Where is Mom?" Chief Ikoha's heart ached at the sound of his daughter's voice. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the words were hard to find. "Wendy, my dear Wendy," he began, his voice breaking. "There is something I need to tell you. Something terrible had happened." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then Wendy's voice, filled with dread, asked, "What happened, Daddy? Please tell me." Chief Ikoha closed his eyes, willing himself to be strong, but the pain was too much. "It's your mother," he said, barely above a whisper. She's gone, Wendy. There was an accident. The plane, it crashed. She didn't make it." For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line, and then a heart-wrenching scream filled the air. Wendy's cry of anguish was so loud that it seemed to echo through the room. Chief Ikoha could hear her sobbing uncontrollably, her pain mirroring his own. It was a sound that broke his heart all over again. Daddy, no, no, this can't be happening. Please tell me it's not true. Wendy wailed, her voice filled with desperation. Chief Ikoha's own tears began to fall again as he listened to his daughter's cries. I'm so sorry, Wendy, he whispered, his voice filled with sorrow. I'm so sorry. The two of them cried together over the phone, their shared grief connecting them even across the distance. Wendy's heart was shattered and she could barely breathe through the pain. I'm coming home, Daddy, she said through her tears. I need to be with you. I can't stay here. I have to be back to Nigeria. Chief Iko had tried to discourage her, knowing that the journey would be difficult and that she had her studies to consider. But Wendy was adamant. Please, Daddy, she pleaded. I need to be there with you. I can't go through this alone. Hearing the determination in her voice, Chief Ikoha knew he couldn't stop her. He didn't have the strength to argue, and in truth, he wanted nothing more than to have his daughter by his side during this dark time. Okay, Wendy, he finally said, his voice heavy with emotion. You can come home. Wendy promised to make the arrangements immediately, and Chief Ikoha felt a sense of relief knowing that she would be with him soon. And as he hung up the phone, he couldn't help but feel the crushing weight of his loss once again. Akachi, who had been quietly listening nearby, felt a deep sadness in his heart. The whole compound seemed to be grieving, as if the very walls and floors were mourning Madame Soporo's loss. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and empty. Even the evening air felt heavy with sorrow, as if the world itself were grieving with them. When they finally arrived in Nigeria, and the moment she saw her father at the airport, she broke down in tears. Chief Ikoha, trying to be strong, wrapped his arms around his daughter and held her close. The airport was bustling with people going about their lives, but for the father and daughter, time seemed to stand still. They cried together, their hearts heavy with grief over the loss of Sapporo, Wendy's mother and Chief Ikoha's beloved wife. It was an emotional moment, one that neither of them would ever forget. As they drove back home, Wendy couldn't stop thinking about her mother. The memories flooded her mind, the laughter, the warmth, the love they had shared. It was hard to believe that her mother was really gone. The house, once filled with her mother's presence, now felt empty and cold. Wendy knew that things would never be the same again, but she knew that she had to be strong for her father. He was hurting too, and they needed each other now more than ever. Chief Ikoha, on the other hand, was trying his best to put on a brave face, but deep down, he was still in pain. Losing Sapporo had left a hole in his heart that he didn't know how to fill. She had been his partner, his confidant, and his greatest support. The thought of living without her was almost unbearable, but he knew he had to keep going. For Wendy's sake, she was all he had left now, and he couldn't let her see just how broken he truly was. Once they were home, Chief Iko had begun making arrangements for Sapporo's burial. He wanted to make sure everything was in order so that Wendy could return to London to continue her studies. It wasn't easy for him, but he knew that he had to be strong. He spent hours on phone talking to family members, organizing the details, and ensuring that everything would go smoothly. All the while, Wendy stayed by his side, offering her support and trying to help in any way she could. The day of the burial came, and it was one filled with tears and sorrow. Friends and family gathered to pay their respects, and the atmosphere was heavy with grief. The ceremony was simple but dignified, just as Sapporo would have wanted. As they lowered her body into the ground, Chief Iko had felt a wave of despair wash over him. This was the final goodbye, the moment he had been dreading since the day she died. He stood there, watching in silence as the earth covered her casket, his heart breaking all over again. Wendy was also struggling to keep herself together. Seeing her mother being laid to rest was the hardest thing she had ever had to endure. She clung to her father's arms, tears streaming down her face as they said their final goodbyes. The sound of the death hitting the casket echoed in her ears, a painful reminder that her mother was truly gone. After the burial, the house was quiet. The days that followed were difficult for both father and daughter. They spent their time reminiscing about Sapporo, sharing stories, and comforting each other as best as they could. Chief Ikoha, despite his grief, knew that he had to keep going. Wendy still had her whole life ahead of her, and he wanted to make sure she returned to London to complete her studies. He focused on helping her prepare for the journey, masking the ache in his heart with a determination to see his daughter succeed. Weeks passed, and soon it was time for Wendy to return to London. She didn't want to leave her father, but she knew that her mother would have wanted her to continue her education. Chief Ikoha, though still hurting, did everything he could to help her get ready. He helped pack her bags, made sure her documents were in order, and even bought a few extra things for her to take back with her. But just as they were beginning to feel like they could move forward, something unexpected happened. One morning, as they were having a conversation about her travel plans, Chief Ikoha suddenly slumped over, unconscious. Wendy panicked, her heart racing with fear. She called out to him, but there was no response. In a frenzy, she called for Akachi, who rushed to the scene. Together, they quickly lifted Chief Ikoha and drove him to the hospital. The drive felt like an eternity, and Wendy couldn't stop crying. Her mind raced with terrible thoughts. What if she lost her father too? She couldn't bear the thought of losing another parent. Akachi, though deeply worried himself, tried his best to comfort her, assuring her that everything would be alright. But the fear in his own heart was evident. When they arrived at the hospital, Chief Ikoha was immediately taken into the emergency room. Wendy and Akachi waited anxiously outside, praying for good news. After what felt like hours, a doctor finally came out to speak with them. He told them that Chief Ikoha had suffered a sudden spike in his blood pressure, like due to the immense stress he had been under. The doctor warned that if it wasn't properly managed, it could lead to something much worse. Wendy's heart sank as she listened to the doctor. She had already lost her mother. She couldn't lose her father too. She pleaded with the doctor to do everything possible to help him, and the doctor assured her that they would. Chief Ikoha was stabilized, but the doctor emphasized the importance of him taking it easy and avoiding any further stress. When Chief Ikoha was finally awake, Wendy rushed to his side. Seeing her father lying in the hospital bed, looking so weak and fragile, filled her with fear and sadness. "Daddy, please," she begged, tears in her eyes. "You have to take care of yourself. I need you. Don't leave me too." Chief Ikoha, seeing the pain on his daughter's face, felt a renewed sense of resolve. He didn't want to see her suffer any more than she already had. He reached out and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I'll be okay, my dear," he said, trying to reassure her. "I promise, I will take it easy. I'm not going anywhere." But deep down, Chief Ikoha knew that things will never be the same. The loss of Sapporo had taken a toll on him, one that he wasn't sure he could fully recover from. Still, for Wendy's sake, he resolved to put up a strong front. He would do everything he could to stay healthy and be there for his daughter. She was all he had left now, and he couldn't bear the thought of leaving her alone in the world. As the days went by, Chief Ikoha slowly began to recover. He followed the doctor's orders and took things one day at a time. Wendy, though still worried, felt a little better knowing that her father was getting the care he needed. She stayed by his side, helping him with his medication and making sure he rested. Akachi too did everything he could to assist, ensuring that the house ran smoothly and that Chief Ikoha could focus on his recovery. Wendy, though deeply concerned about her father's health, knew that she had to return to London to continue her studies. Chief Ikoha assured her that he would be fine and encouraged her to go back to school. He knew how important her education was to her, and he didn't want to stand in the way of her dreams. With a heavy heart, Wendy packed her bags and prepared for the journey back to London. The day of her departure was filled with mixed emotions. Chief Ikoha put on a brave face as he drove her to the airport, but inside, he felt a deep sense of loneliness creeping in. Wendy, too, was struggling to hold back her tears. She didn't want to leave her father, especially not when he was still grieving the loss of her mother. But she knew that staying wouldn't change anything. She had to move forward with her life. When they arrived at the airport, Wendy hugged her father tightly. "Daddy, please take care of yourself," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll call you every day to check on you. Promise me you'll stay healthy." Chief Ikoha nodded, forcing a smile. "I promise, my dear. I'll take care of myself, and I'll be here waiting for you when you finish your studies. Now go and make us all proud." With one last embrace, Wendy boarded her flight. The journey back to London was long and quiet, filled with thoughts of her father. She knew he was trying to be strong for her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he was still deeply hurting. When she arrived in London, she called her father immediately to let him know that she had arrived safely. "Daddy, I'm here," she said over the phone. "Please don't forget to take your medication and rest. You have to be strong for me." "I will, Wendy," Chief Ikoha replied, his voice steady but with a hint of sadness. "You focus on your studies and don't worry about me. I'll be fine." But as the days passed, after Wendy's departure, Chief Ikoha began to slip back into his old habits. The house, now emptier than ever, became a place of solitude and sorrow. He spent most of his time alone in his room, avoiding the outside world. The grief he had tried to bury resurfaced, and he found himself sinking into a deep sadness once more. Akachi, the gateman, who had worked for Chief Ikoha for many years, noticed the change in his boss again. He became increasingly worried as he watched Chief Ikoha withdrawn from everything around him. He knew that Chief Ikoha wasn't taking care of himself. He rarely ate, he barely slept, and his medication often went untouched. Akachi took it upon himself to check on Chief Ikoha regularly, knocking on his door and urging him to eat or take his pills. But despite his efforts, he could see that the chief was struggling. After a few days of this, Akachi began to think that perhaps Chief Ikoha needed more help than he could provide. He decided that the chief needed a housekeeper, someone who could cook for him, make sure he took his medications, and keep the house in order. Akachi wasn't sure how to go about finding someone trustworthy enough for the job, so he sent a message to Wendy explaining the situation. Wendy agreed that her father needed help. She knew how much her father valued privacy, but she also knew that his health was more important. She gave Akachi her approval to search for a capable and trustworthy housekeeper. "Find someone who can take care of him," she instructed. "Someone who will look after him like family." A few days later, Akachi received a surprise visit. It was Mandy, his fiancée. Mandy and Akachi had been together for a long time, and though they didn't see each other often because of their work, they cared deeply for one another. Since Madame Soporo's passing, Akachi had been so focused on taking care of Chief Ikoha that he hadn't left the compound at all. Mandy, worried about him, decided to visit, using the address Akachi had once given her. Akachi was taken aback when he saw Mandy at the gate. He hadn't expected her, but he was glad to see her. "Mandy, what a surprise," he exclaimed, opening the gate for her. "It's been so long." Mandy smiled, though there was concern in her eyes. "I had to come and see you, Akachi. I was worried. It's been ages since we last talked properly." Akachi welcomed her in and led her to a quiet spot in the compound where they talked. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to relax a little. He told Mandy about everything that had been going on, the passing of Madame Soporo, Wendy's departure to London, and how Chief Ikoha had been struggling ever since. Mandy listened intently, her heart aching for the family that had been through so much. Akachi, this is so sad, Mandy said softly. I can't imagine how the chief must be feeling. And you've been here all this time, taking care of everything. You're a good man, Akachi. Akachi shook his head. I'm just doing what I can. But the chief needs more help. He needs someone to look after him properly. I was hoping you might know someone who could work as a housekeeper for him. Mandy thought for a moment. I might know someone, she said finally. I will ask around and see if I can find someone trustworthy. The chief deserves the best care, especially after everything he's been through. They spent more time together, talking about their lives and the future. But as the evening grew darker, Mandy knew it was time to leave. She had come to check on Akachi, and though she was worried about him, she was glad to see that he was still the kind, caring man she had always known. She promised to return soon and help in any way she could. As Mandy left the compound, Akachi felt a small sense of relief. He was grateful for her visit and for her willingness to help find a housekeeper for Chief Ikoha. He hoped that with a bit of extra care, the chief would start to feel better and find some peace. After Mandy left Chief Ikoha's place, her mind was filled with thoughts about the opportunity that had presented itself. She couldn't stop thinking about all the things Akachi had told her about the chief, the nice things he did for people, how generous he was, and most importantly, how wealthy he was. Mandy saw this as a chance to take advantage of the situation, especially since Chief Ikoha was grieving and vulnerable. The next day, Mandy made up her mind. She returned to Chief Ikoha's place, determined to see Akachi again. When she arrived, Akachi was surprised to see her so soon. Mandy, what brings you back here today? He asked, curious about her sudden return. Mandy didn't hesitate. Akachi, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, and I've decided that I want to take the job as chief's housekeeper. Akachi couldn't believe his ears. What? You want to be the housekeeper? But Mandy, you're a graduate. You've studied hard and worked so hard to get where you are. This job is not for someone like you. But Mandy was determined. She looked at Akachi in his eyes and said, I know it sounds strange, but I've thought it through. This is an opportunity for us. Akachi, think about it. Chief is grieving and vulnerable, and we could use this situation to our own advantage. We could make some money from this, enough to change our lives. Akachi's heart sank as he listened to Mandy's words. He knew what she was implying, and it didn't sit well with him. Mandy, Chief Ikoha doesn't deserve that. He's been nothing but kind to me, to everyone, and I can't be a part of something like this. But Mandy wasn't ready to back down. She leaned closer to Akachi and whispered, Akachi, if you don't go along with this, I will leave you. I love you, but I need to think about my future too. We could have a better life together if we do this. Akachi felt a heavy weight in his chest. He loved Mandy deeply, and the thought of losing her was unbearable. After a moment of silence, he reluctantly agreed. All right, Mandy, I will go along with your plan, but please be careful. Chief doesn't deserve to be hurt any more than he already has. Mandy smiled and reassured him. Don't worry, Akachi. I've got everything under control. I won't disappoint you. The next day, Akachi took Mandy to see Chief Ikoha. He told the chief that Wendy had arranged for someone to take care of him and that Mandy would be the new housekeeper. Chief Ikoha, too weak and tired to argue, simply nodded in agreement. That's fine, he said softly. Akachi, show her around and explain what she needs to do. I'm too tired to talk much. Akachi, pretending not to know Mandy, led her to the guest room, which would be her new living space. He explained the job description, telling her about the daily tasks she would need to take care of, such as cooking, cleaning, and making sure Chief took his medication. Mandy listened carefully, nodding along, but deep down she was already thinking about how she could exploit the situation for her own gain. As they walked through the quiet house, Akachi couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He knew what Mandy was planning wasn't right, but he couldn't bring himself to stop it. He only hoped that things wouldn't get out of hand. And so, Mandy began her new role as Chief Ikoha's housekeeper with a hidden agenda that only she and Akachi knew about. The once peaceful home now held secrets and lies. Mandy began her new role in Chief Ikoha's house, cooking, cleaning the house, and ensuring that Chief Ikoha was comfortable. At first, everything seemed to be going well. Chief started eating properly, taking his medication, and slowly regaining some of his strength. He seemed a little more agile and a bit more like his old self, which brought a sense of relief to Akachi, who had been so worried about his boss. But Mandy was not pleased. This was not part of her plan. Chief Ikoha was supposed to remain weak and grieving, making it easier for her to take advantage of the situation. Seeing him start to recover threatened everything she had schemed for. So, behind Akachi's back, Mandy sought out a chemist who could give her a drug that would worsen a person's blood pressure. The chemist, not asking too many questions, handed over the pills, and Mandy slipped them into her pocket with a twisted sense of satisfaction. She began administering the drug to Chief Ikoha in secret. Slowly but surely, the effect started to show. Chief began feeling sick again. He was frequently weak, dizzy, and unable to carry out even the simplest task. His visits to the clinic became more frequent, and the doctors couldn't seem to understand why his condition was worsening so quickly, especially after he had shown signs of improvement. Akachi, on the other hand, was baffled. He couldn't understand what was happening. Chief had been on the mend, and now suddenly he was back to being ill, even worse than before. Akachi was worried, but Mandy didn't share the full story with him. She kept her secret, continuing to pretend that she was caring for Chief while in reality, she was the cause of his suffering. When Chief Ikoha was hospitalized, Mandy took advantage of his absence. She would sneak into his room, knowing that he kept a lot of money hidden away there. Since the death of his wife, Soporo, Chief had avoided going to the bank, preferring to keep his money close at hand. Mandy knew this, and she made sure to steal as much as she could whenever she had the chance. With each day that passed, Chief grew weaker and Mandy grew bolder in her thefts. She believed that her plan was working perfectly, and soon enough, she would have everything she wanted. Wendy always kept in close contact with her father, Chief Ikoha. Even while she was away studying in London, she was concerned about his health, especially since Akachi regularly updated her on Chief's condition. Each report seemed to carry more bad news. Chief was getting weaker, visiting the clinic more often, and seemed to be losing the strength he had begun to regain. Wendy's worry grew with each passing day. After the academic session ended, Wendy decided it was time to visit her father during the holidays. She needed to know what was really happening to him, but she didn't want to cause any unnecessary alarm. So she kept her plans to herself. Wendy wanted to surprise her father, hoping that her visit would lift his spirits and perhaps help her understand what was causing his decline. The trip back to Nigeria was smooth, and soon enough, Wendy was standing at the doorstep of her father's home. When Chief Ikoha opened the door and saw his daughter, his eyes lit up with surprise and joy. They embraced warmly, holding onto each other for what felt like an eternity. Wendy could feel how frail her father had become, but she smiled, determined to make the most of her time with him. After freshening up, Wendy spent the rest of the day by her father's side in his room. She wanted to understand what was going on with him, so she asked questions about his health, trying to piece together the mystery of his sudden deterioration. Chief tried to reassure her, but it was clear that he was not well. His voice was weaker, and he moved slowly, like every step he took a great deal of effort. That evening, Mandy brought Chief's dinner to his room, as he no longer had the strength to come to the dining room. After eating, Chief asked Wendy to help him with his medication. As she went through the containers of pills, one particular bottle caught her attention. The label had been peeled off, leaving the container unmarked and suspicious. Wendy, being a medical student, knew that it was unusual and improper for any clinic or pharmacy to give medication without a label. She felt a strong urge to keep the mysterious drug aside, and so she did. She handed her father the medications she recognized and knew to be safe. Meanwhile, Mandy, who was oblivious to Wendy's medical knowledge, assumed that Wendy would just give Chief all the drugs, including the one she had been using to gradually harm him. The following day, Wendy insisted on accompanying her father to his checkup at the family doctor's office. She took the unmarked container of pills with her, determined to find out what it was and why her father had been giving it. When they arrived at the clinic, Wendy waited for the right moment to show the doctor the drug. As soon as the doctor saw the container, his face grew serious. He quickly checked his records, going through the list of medications he had prescribed for Chief Ikoha. He was certain that he had never given Chief this particular drug. The doctor explained to Wendy that the drug in the unmarked container was not one he would have prescribed, and in fact, it was dangerous. He confirmed that it was likely responsible for Chief's sudden and frequent health crises. Wendy was stunned. She couldn't understand how this had happened. Why would her father be taking a drug that was harming him? The question swelled in her mind, and she knew she had to get to the bottom of this mystery. Something was wrong, and it was clear that someone had been tampering with her father's health. When Wendy and Chief Ikoha returned home from the doctor's office, Wendy knew she had to act quickly. Her father's life had been put in danger, and she needed to find out how. She decided to confront both Akachi and Mandy to uncover the truth behind the mysterious drug that had caused her father's health to worsen. Wendy called both Akachi and Mandy into the living room and presented the unmarked drug to them. She asked if either of them knew anything about it. Akachi, clearly nervous, swore that he didn't know where the drug had come from. He confirmed that it was not part of the medication Chief had been given at the hospital. Mandy, on the other hand, remained calm and denied any knowledge of the drug. However, Wendy wasn't convinced. She could sense that something was off. She locked the door to the living room, making sure neither of them could leave. And then she informed them that she had called the police. The truth had to come out, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. The mention of the police seemed to push Akachi over the edge. His fear and guilt began to overwhelm him, and he turned to Mandy, demanding that she tell the truth. He didn't want to go to jail for something he didn't do. Despite his plea, Mandy continued to deny everything, trying to maintain her innocence. But the pressure became too much for Akachi. Filled with fear and guilt, he confessed everything to Wendy and Chief Ikoha. He admitted that he knew Mandy before she came to work for them. He explained that Mandy was his fiancée and that they had been in a relationship for some time. He revealed her true mission: to take advantage of Chief's grief and wealth. However, he insisted that he had never agreed to anything that would harm Chief, and he begged for their forgiveness. Seeing that Akachi had revealed their secret, Mandy realized that there was no point in continuing her denial. She too confessed to everything. She admitted that she had been giving Chief the dangerous drug to worsen his condition so that she could steal from him while he was weak and vulnerable. Mandy pleaded for mercy, but the damage had already been done. Wendy was in shock. She couldn't believe that someone could be so heartless and cruel, especially towards her grieving father. She scolded Akachi for bringing in such an evil-minded person into their home, blaming him for not protecting Chief from harm. The trust that had once existed between them was shattered. When the police arrived, Chief Ikoha told them to take Mandy away. He had no choice but to sack Akachi as well. Despite Akachi's plea for mercy, Chief and Wendy could not allow someone who had betrayed their trust to remain in their lives. As much as it hurt Chief to lose someone who had worked for him for so long, the betrayal was too deep to ignore. After the incident, Wendy spent the rest of her holiday taking care of her father, making sure he was on the path to recovery. She knew that Chief needed time to heal, both physically and emotionally. As her holiday came to an end, Wendy realized that she couldn't leave her father alone in Nigeria. She begged him to come with her to London for a while so that she could look after him properly. Chief Ikoha agreed. Understanding that he needed to be close to his daughter, who had shown such strength and determination in protecting him. They traveled to London together, where Wendy continued her studies while caring for her father. With time, Chief's health improved and he slowly regained his strength. He was able to enjoy the company of his daughter, who had become his greatest source of comfort. Wendy eventually graduated with flying colors. She was now a fully qualified medical doctor, ready to take on the world and make her father proud. Chief Ikoha couldn't have been happier for his daughter, knowing that she had accomplished so much despite the challenges they had faced. Meanwhile, Mandy was eventually released from jail, but her life had taken a tragic turn. Her mother, who had been sick for some time, passed away after learning about what had happened to Mandy. The shame and disappointment were too much for her to bear. As for Akachi, he was heartbroken by the events that had unfolded. He realized that he had made a terrible mistake by allowing Mandy to enter their lives. He couldn't forgive himself for what had happened, and he decided that he could no longer be with someone who had caused so much pain and suffering. Akachi broke off his relationship with Mandy, vowing never to let such evil enter his life again. Chief Ikoha and Wendy continued to support each other, finding strength in their bond as father and daughter. They had been through so much together, and they knew that as long as they had each other, they could face any challenge that came their way. And so, they moved forward, carrying the lesson they had learned and the memories of those they had lost, always striving to live their lives with kindness, integrity, and love. The most important lesson from this story is that even those we trust deeply can betray us unexpectedly. It is crucial to be mindful of the people we allow into our lives. And with that, my dear friends, our story comes to a close. But remember, the magic of storytelling lives on, waiting to whisk us away on new adventures, where the wonders of imagination know no bounds. Goodbye for now, and may your dreams be filled with joy, wonder, and endless possibility. Thank you so much for watching. Please kindly comment, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more interesting stories.